Greg in Brooklyn, New York. You're on Free Talk Live with Ian, Derek, Jay, and Mark.
Hey, guys. How's
Hi,
it
Greg.
going?
Good.
Hey.
What's on your mind tonight?
Well, I called on Friday. I was talking about how there are, I think, some legitimate things that government could be used for, and more generally, when you might want to centralize things versus decentralize them. And in my opinion, and I've been studying the subject a lot because of the startup that I run, how to run organizations. And basically it boils down to this. People have minimum expectations, which change from century to century or society to society. And if an expectation, the minimum expectation shared by a huge amount of the population, it might make sense for a single entity to go and try to ensure that, because then the costs of ensuring that go down dramatically because of economies of scale, basically.
Like when, for instance, the government legalizes slavery, and since a large enough percentage of the population thinks it's acceptable, they can implement slavery more efficiently than if people tried to do it themselves.
Well, I wouldn't exactly use that as an example, but property rights, bringing up slavery, I would say property rights would be an example of something that everyone is interested in defending, and so
That's not
government
true.
provided courts.
No, first of all, that's not true. There are people who don't believe in property. So to say that everyone's interested in defending property rights would be an incorrect statement.
And of course, one of the difficulties with property is even discussing it when the state is involved. If an organization can demand money from you in order to secure your property, they are by themselves, by their very definition, the monopolistic thieves.
Well, first of all, I agree with you that not everybody wants anything. I mean, some people prefer to be homeless, for example, and there's very few things that everyone will agree on. So what I'm saying is how things get organized. There's an element of basically emergent phenomenon where it's not that there's a legitimate moral reason for a government. It's more like it comes together, and if it will come together, what kind of things would lead to better outcomes if it did. And those kinds of things all fall into one thing, which is that if enough people want it, if 90% of people need emergency room care to save their life, then that type of thing you might want to socialize the costs of. But not
Why?
I wouldn't want to do anything like that.
If I saw a bunch of people who needed emergency room services, I would go into business as a hospital.
Or you could create a charity to help people that can't afford to pay those hospital bills if you wanted to. Look, the problem with what you're saying here is not that there aren't people who could use certain services and would benefit from those services, or that there might be quantity discounts or bulk buy discounts available in the marketplace for large groups of people. But the thing is, when you're forcing people into a bulk buy discount, that becomes a problem. If you're forcing people to pay for services they might have a moral objection to, that becomes a problem. I have a moral objection to forcing people to do anything against their will that they're not interested in joining with. So if it's such a great idea, if let's just say the emergency room care or whatever, something that you think is very important, if you think this is such a great idea, then why not put together some sort of voluntary association of people that can come together and negotiate? Like, doesn't the AARP do this to some extent? They negotiate for all of their members to get discounts on things in the marketplace.
Sure.
So you could do the same thing, and then everything you'd be doing would be completely consensual, and you wouldn't have to put any guns to anyone's head. Or I'm sorry, you wouldn't do it, Greg, but the police would certainly do it.
Well, sure. And
stead.
again, right. I mean, like I said last time, there's two different discussions here. One is if you want to maximize the benefit of the outcomes, then that's sort of the utilitarian approach. If you talk about morality or forcing people, that's a completely separate discussion because
well, it's also your opinion about
force...
what's the benefit, right? Like the person who is setting up the government program that forcing people into it, they're saying they know what's best and that they're going to force everyone into what they think is best for them because they know what's best. But what if the other people who are getting forced into the program have a different idea about what is best? What if they want something that's completely different from what they're being forced to support? That's not taken under consideration, is it?
Well, yeah, there's a legitimate concern that once you put the machinery of government in place, that it could be hijacked by special interest groups and force people to do things that are not necessarily things that 99% of people need. I'm talking about things that legitimately, at this point, can be shown that 99% of people want their life to be saved. when they have something that needs emergency care. That's not something that is really that controversial. I think.
Why do you?
I'm
What's
saying very
controversial
simple,
is putting a gun to somebody's head and threatening them with violence if they don't want to go along with your brilliant plan. I mean, you do see that that's wrong, right?
But Greg,
of course I see it.
90% of people wanted cotton picked in 1860. That's the point of what Free Talk Live does. I get where you're coming from a utilitarian standpoint that, yes, the majority's largely going to get their way because they can eviscerate the minority. They have the power of size on their side. Generally, that's the case.
And that's why you need by the way, that's why you need to protect civil rights as well. You need the government to limit itself. That's very important as well.
But
how's that working out?
It's never going to do that, and you know that. The government is an organization of power.
If you put Greg in charge, they would really...
That centralizes. No, Greg's got a great point here. His point is of emergent technologies, and that's true. But what you're assuming is that technology emerges linearly, and I disagree with that point, Greg. The fact is that things change. Man went from being self-directed to being horse-directed, in that he sat on a horse and the horse went where the horse wanted, even though the man tried to direct it, to being self-directed in a car. Like, things went differently than along that linear progression. And what my claim to you is that Free Talk Live, as a voice for morality, not for practicality, claims that people should be able to have singular volition. Yes, the individuals, the hoi polloi, they'll always ultimately get what they want after they have begged their masters long enough. Likely they'll get it, and I think they should. Someplace else. Leave me alone.
Well, I think the morality and the practicality actually go hand in hand. I would disagree with Greg's characterization here that there's some sort of choice between, economies of scale and forcing everyone into the same system and having freedom and freedom of choice. I think that you get better economies of scale, better service when you have freedom.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's more practical and more moral.
Yeah, right. I mean, Greg, you're here advocating putting people in a prison cell if they don't want to go along with your program, and it's just not okay with me.
Oh, no, I'm not.
Yeah, you are.
I just want to,
aren't you taking these positions because you believe in them? Or are you just, taking the positions for the purpose of taking them?
I do believe in it, and in the sense that I'm asking myself the question, if we do have government, which anyway, an organization has to be run somehow, there has to be a management somehow. So if we do have a constitution or something, how do we actually set it up? What should it do? And it took me a long time to figure out what is common to all the things that legitimately seem to be lead to better outcomes. And it seems to be only the things that most people, an overwhelming number of people, need.
So most people would like to have a roof over their head. Most people would like to be protected from the elements.
Sure.
Would you say that most people then should expect that the government provide them with shelter?
Well, I would certainly argue that the government should take away a lot of the means-tested welfare that they have and replace it with unconditional basic income that would certainly provide for minimal shelter, minimal food, minimal water, and everything else, so that people.
And if I don't want to, and if I don't want to contribute to that program, then what should happen to me?
Well, if you run a business, and your business gets a license to operate in a particular jurisdiction, then that comes with a contract. And
I don't have a license.
The license doesn't come with a contract. The license is, we will kill you if you put your business here and you haven't gotten our licensure. I mean, that's not a contract exactly.
If you're going to use force against people, Greg, you should at least own it. You should at least own up to it. I thank you for the call tonight. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. It's Free Talk Live. You want to be a dictator? Own it. We should continue to comment a little further on what the gentleman Greg in New York was having to say, because after the segment was over and we were in the middle of the break, we were kind of continuing to have a discussion about him, and it's frustrating when people who are obviously intelligent, like, Greg's no dummy.
I think he's a great caller.
Right? He's always got smart-sounding calls. He's not a dummy.
And he listens to input. It's not like a brick wall where he's just got his ideas and he's not going to listen to any of yours. So he takes some in. And
we have to feel like a brick wall, right?
Yes.
Like we have to feel that way. We are ideologues.
Yeah. Well, and so is he. His ideology is a different one. And
he's
that
much
is
more practically based, though.
Then
Well,
what?
I don't know if I agree that it's practical to buy things all in one big bureaucracy because I think that makes things very inefficient.
That's the conversation that, the problem is with practicality is that you can almost never win the argument in having conversations with people about practicality of government because, they'll say, oh, economies of scale and that sort of thing. But one thing you need to understand is that big rewards big. When it comes to economies of scale, is that big governments want to do business with big companies. Big companies like big companies. They don't want to do business with small companies because they just don't know how to interact with them. I've had this happen several times with advertisers. Just like, send me an insertion order and over your contract and all these things. I'm like, are you going to buy these ads? Do you want these ads? Because I'll run them for you. And I don't have all this stuff. I can generate it for you if that's what you need, but they know. They get the feel. Yeah, my wife/business office manager will get that information to you when she's put my son down for a nap. They know what's up. They can get the feeling. And so what you're doing when you're talking about big government is you're instituting fascism. Every time, all the time. That's all you can do. And by fascism, I mean big corporations, government, the marriage corporations and government. That's what fascism is to me. I'm not talking about the racist aspect of fascism that has cropped up along the way.
I think that's where Greg gets derailed because I know I'm speculating, but this is the way I thought for a little while. It's like, oh, well, economies of scale. I learned a little bit of economics in college, and it makes more sense that we all buy in our health insurance all the same. We all benefit from that because, I pay less of a rate now, and I don't know. You get some benefit when you buy a lot of stuff, and people don't always want that. Maybe I want the freedom to not buy health insurance, and so I don't benefit from that economy of scale.
It's true that you do, if you buy in bulk, you get a discount, right? If you buy the big long sandwich at the sub shop, you'll get a better price per inch than you will if you buy the shorter sandwich. I mean, that's all true.
Yeah, so it seems practical, but it assumes I want the sandwich.
But the thing that is missing is that if everyone were to buy things from one sub shop, and that one sub shop were the only shop that was in town, and that's the only place you can go and get food, you're going to see that the prices are going to go up, and that the service is not going to be so hot because they know you can't go anywhere else. So even if you are buying all from the same group or whatever, if that's the only group from which you can buy, you're not going to get a good deal from that group, even if everyone is throwing in money. And that's what we're talking about with the proposal of government-run healthcare, is one source from which people can purchase and are forced to purchase a product. And the idea that that's going to somehow result in efficiency is ridiculous.
It sounds like these stories I heard about the Soviet Union where people would go back before the empire fell, and they would go to the grocery store and have to choose from just can of soup, like bread
lines,
and that was it. You didn't have all these choices of Wonder Bread or Pepperidge Farm.
A lot of
or
people
whatever
found it very disconcerting when they switched over from communism to capitalism. Is that
too many choices? It could be shocking.
2 types of pickles.
It can be paralyzing.
I remember we talked to somebody who was telling us about the former Soviet states afterwards and what things were like there, and how the different Soviet states kind of handled the changeover. Some of them were more friendly to the marketplace than others. Estonia was mentioned as one of the more friendly to the marketplaces, and the description we had from this former Russian person or Estonian person.
Well, Greg, by the way, is from Russia too, and he probably could speak to that.
I didn't know that.
I believe so. I believe that's what he said.
Anyway, the story was that they, like a McDonald's opened up, and people would go in there and have no idea what to do. They would stand there and not what?
Like, huh?
A menu? I mean, they were used to standing in lines for hours to get some moldy, stale bread.
Yeah, and you only have one choice. It would be like one of those people who's only seen one brand of pickles in their entire life, just saying like, well, we get economies of scale from having the same pickle company. How dare you want choices in your pickles?
Well, the pickles are a little rotten, but it's an economy of scale. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. And again, that ignores all of the morality question as well. And to me, that if you're presenting the immorality of putting a gun to someone's head, and you've got someone who is saying, well, but that's what we need to do. We have to put guns to people's heads because it's for their own good. That's probably not a good prospect for freedom, at least not at that time. As we continue here talking about explaining the ideas of freedom to people who have it in their head some sort of grandiose scheme to make things better. Well, if we would only change this about government, if we would only have this program, because people need stuff, we need to take care of them. They're expecting to be taken care of, and so we need to have government programs to take care of people. I mean, well, don't you want to help sick people and help old people and help poor people? Are you just callous? Don't you? I mean, are you libertarians? You don't want to help people, do you?
I think that kind of thinking is a statist trap for smart people, because like people like Greg they want to figure out how to fix the world. There are some serious problems here, and if I could just figure out what they are and adjust them with these levers and knobs that government gives me, I'll make everything okay. So he's trying to make the case of like, this is how we do it, but I think he's wrong.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And you meet so many smart statists, right? Like these people who are just brilliant at figuring out how to control you. And
they want to be the farmers on the human farm.
They won't think about it that way, though.
But they want to control the other people, because we know that the world is full. I mean, half of the population has an IQ under 100. Let's be serious here. So, I mean, do humans need management? They do. As far as I'm concerned, they do. Do they need government? As far as I'm concerned, they do. The one caveat I would state is that, look, competition is generally good. Competition brings us innovation, lower prices, better customer service, so many things. And all we need is competition in governments to provide people with huge leaps forward. Because really, when it comes down to it, statism, the idea that government's going to solve problems is just, it's one tiny little step forward, every 50 years. What's the ultimate difference?
Hold on a second. I mean, that's not true, right? Because ultimately government creates more problems than it solves.
I'm not talking about that, but the steps forward I'm saying is in the human condition. And I would suggest that the steps forward in the human condition come
They're
from
in spite of government, in my opinion.
Innovation. They come from inventions, technology, these kind of things.
Usually in the spaces wherein government doesn't exist.
But the government takes credit for all of this stuff. I think it's arguable that democracy or republic or whatever terminology you wish to describe it with was a step forward. But the idea that somehow the best form of government was created 230-something years ago and that we're not going to see anything better than this is really ludicrous. The next obvious step is competition. It used to be that people couldn't live together that were of different religions. They just couldn't do it. Well, why in the world? Now they can. They live just fine on the same streets together. Why in the world? And people have different insurance companies. They have different cell providers. They have different. Why can't they have different governments? And by that, I mean an organization that's going to provide them with some level of protection, the kind of protection that they want and demand for themselves.
Well, the reason why they can is because the state would have it no other way. I mean, they want you in their system because you're funding their system and their pensions and all of that. There's a lot of money involved in the state as it currently exists. And to allow people to simply opt out, which would be the solution. You know, like the idea we were talking, I think you were talking on the Sunday show with Rich Paul, who called in from jail about sort of being a steward of a child rather than an owner as a parent. The idea being that once that child is ready to take on responsibility as an adult, that they should be allowed to do that, that they should be allowed to break free from the shackles of the parents, the controls of the parents, if they think they're ready for it. Maybe it turns out they're wrong, they come back to their parents, and then, all right, well, now you got to follow the rules again, kid, if you want to live under our roof, that kind of thing. So why couldn't the same thing be true with a government where, you know, you're born into the world and there's, you know, your parents have this government that they might have hired to do whatever it is they would have a government for. I don't know what you would want one for, but Marx insists that people want it. So, you know, there would be still presumably people that want some sort of governmental service. So obviously their children would be under that service as well. But if the child has decided they would prefer a different government service at some point, they should be able to change that or opt out entirely and be a self-governor.
It's too dangerous. Just one person breaking free of the state and having freedom would ruin it for everybody.
Well, that's really the problem with a monopoly system, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you allow one person to get away with it, then the whole thing essentially is in jeopardy. This is the reason, essentially, that police officers will ultimately kill you in order to pull you over to give you a speeding ticket. If you don't pull over, then, pretty soon lots of cops will be behind you. You still don't pull over. They'll start,
Running
trying
off
to
the
put up
road.
roadblocks, maybe shooting out your tires. Helicopters will be involved. They have to stop you because you must obey.
Yeah, and if you don't, it's the death of the state, right? The death of the idea of obedience.
If they're like, well, we got his license plate number, whatever, we'll just send him a ticket. They can't do that. It's the obvious choice. Yeah, I'm in pursuit, and I got a license plate number. What do you want me to do, Chief? Kill him. Because it has to be the choice.
And it's uncomfortable for the intelligent statist to admit that that's actually what they support. That through the desire to have these wonderful programs that are going to take care of people that are funded by force, you have to ultimately put a threat of violence behind them. And at some point during his call, he did cop to it. But it's very difficult to get somebody to really embrace the idea of, yes, this is what I need to do to fund my program, to make my dreams come true of some sort of society where everybody is taken care of. It has to be backed by the threat of force. It has to be backed by violence because they don't want to have to use violence on people. They really don't.
Do you want to do this the easy way or do you want to do it the hard way?
Yeah. They don't want it to come to that, but they know ultimately and in their heart of hearts that that's where it's coming from.
It seems like most of politics is shielding the truth of language, like sanctions. We use code
Euphemisms.
words.
We're going to starve your poor people in order to teach your rich people a lesson.
Yeah, that'll work.
Right, but Greg or any educated person could sound like they know what they're talking about when they say, well, we should impose sanctions. That sounds like a legitimate, reasonable offer. But, then you consider that's actually hurting people. That's hurting innocent people. Maybe it's not a good idea.
Well, right. You're absolutely right. In fact, there's a book that Daryl Perry publishes on his website, fpp.cc, called The Doublespeak Dictionary.
Yeah.
By Star O'Hara, I think is her name. I read this when I was in jail, Daryl, for civil disobedience. Daryl sent me a copy of it. And it's a whole list of those things where it just goes through all these government euphemisms for violence, essentially, and kind of gives you the real definition of what the word actually means. Like you were saying with sanctions there.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.